Good morning, everyone, and apologies for that. I should have turned on my microphone. So welcome to the second day of DevDays. I'm really excited to be here today and spend the next 45 minutes with all of you. I'm Lena Reinhard. I'm VP Product Engineering at Circle CI, and I'm here to talk about leading through change and rapid growth with all of you. And I'm just going to get my screen share started so I can walk you through the slides. Perfect. So change has been on everybody's minds, and I want to start by telling a little bit about change that I have been through. I don't know where you were on the 1st of March in 2020. To jog your memory a little bit, it was a Sunday. Personally, I had a bit of a cold. I'd gone to bed early, and I had already put my outfit together for the next day because I was about to head to the airport. I was ready to head to San Francisco to meet with my colleagues. I'm part of a globally distributed team, and we were going to have an offsite together that week. I was just ready to go early in the morning at 6:30 when I got a text from my boss, Rob, our CTO. Rob wrote, "Hey Lena, trying all channels, don't fly." So I took off my shoes, canceled my taxi, canceled my flight, and spent the day in the park with a friend. 2 days later, on Tuesday, the 3rd of March, our CEO, Jim, sent an email to the entire company with promotion announcements, and one of them was for me. After 9 months as interim vice president, I took on the role formally. In the very same week, Berlin, where I live, moved into lockdown. Globally, many more countries and cities moved into lockdowns, and we had to cancel our annual department's meeting. This was a time of change for many of us. For me, it meant changing plans for everything that I had wanted to. I drafted an email to my organization about, introducing myself with the move into the new role, introducing strategy, direction for evolving the organization. But all of those plans had to change, or at least be reevaluated, because we were moving into pandemic mode. First of all, I had to make sure that my organization was prepared for what was ahead of us. And I'm sure that every one of you who's here today has a story like that about the last year. You made plans only just to see them evaporate. And at some point, many of us probably stopped making plans altogether. The last year has been a year of many professional and personal difficulties for a lot of people. And today, I want to talk about what this means for our work as leaders, what it means for leading organizations through change. I've gone through career changes. I've worked in corporations, but I've also built and led teams during hypergrowth, like I'm doing right now. We've been doubling or tripling organizations every year. I've also been leading teams to support the Ebola outbreak response in West Africa. So change has been a theme in my career so far. And I want to talk about leading through it. And to get us into that, let's talk a little bit about leadership and what it means. I think that management and leadership are two very important, but two very different things. Management is about coping with complexity, whereas leadership is about coping with ambiguity and change. This means that management roles or roles adjacent to it are often about roles and titles and focus on executing on specific tasks, whereas leadership is an approach and a behavior. The idea in all of that is that leadership skills are skills that everyone can have. Leadership requires us to take the long view, to anticipate what's coming next week, next month, or next year, to create a vision and convey that to people, to make sure everyone understands and is aligned on the goals that we're looking to achieve. So this also means that this talk is for you, no matter if you're an engineer, if you're a manager, or you work in an entirely different role. You can be a leader on your team. Everyone can. And for us as leaders, change is the work, because change is at the core of modern software delivery as well, and at the core of our work that we do every single day with our teams. Leaders support teams in difficult times like the last year. Growing teams or organizations entails change at its core. When we talk about DevOps culture, we fundamentally talk about making change easier, because DevOps culture is about fundamentally making change easy, reducing friction, improving our ability to change and change continuously. As leaders in modern software delivery organization, we choose continuous improvement, continuous change over just being satisfied with the status quo. And we do so for the benefit of our customers, of our teams, of our business. Today, I want to show you some frameworks and tools to help you lead through change with confidence. I'm really looking forward to your questions later and to discussing how to apply those principles. So if you think of any question, please make note. We'll leave some time in the Q&A later on. So in any change that we're facing, the question for us as leaders always is, how will we lead? The journey to being a good leader is ultimately highly personal. As leaders, we're looked at for answers. We're often the first person that people turn to for guidance, for advice, for direction. But most of all, we're constantly put into situations that we haven't been in before, or to do things that we haven't done before. We can train, we can read, we can practice, we can role play, and those are really important things for us to do. But in the end, so much of our ability to do our job well and to lead, that depends on how we treat what's in front of us. It depends on our strengths, on our personality, our thought patterns, and our responses. That means that our role as leaders is very personal. And I want to give you one reassurance before we head into how to treat this level of personal. So Jason Shen, an entrepreneur and former champion gymnast, said, sometimes what our jobs or our companies need most isn't our most brilliant selves. It's just completing a pile of tasks. The role of leaders during times like this is sometimes just very, very simple. It's just completing a pile of tasks. I want to share a little bit with how I think about my role as a leader in my organization. The charts you see here are from Nobel. It's a change agency, and they surveyed employees and correlated responses to the respondent's position in the firm. The interesting part here is that on the horizontal axis, you can see the layers between the people responding and the CEO or president. So basically how many layers they were down in the hierarchy. What Nobel found is that for every management layer between the CEO and the person that they talk to, there's a drop in clarity, there's a drop in inclusion. What this points to is that as leaders, we always need to challenge our own perceptions of our organization. No matter how we feel about things, many of our people will feel worse about them. We have a lot of power through factors like our hierarchy or the tenure that we have. And we also all have biases that impact how we view the things going on around us. And in a constantly changing environment, these biases can be really misleading because our brains use them to help us make decisions about the future, but the past isn't always a good determining factor for that. And in times of change or stress, our instinct will be to return to our biases, which will inevitably lead to blind spots and mistakes. So what does that mean for our role? Our journey as leaders starts with self-awareness. Self-awareness means the ability to recognize and label our emotions, our values, and our goals, and to identify their impact on others during our work. This helps put us into a learning mindset. This learning mindset is really crucial. The research has shown that good leaders are good learners. Leaders who are in learning mode develop stronger leadership skills than their peers. So as leaders, we're cognizant that we don't know everything and we don't have to have all the answers at all times. This introspection and learning will also lead us to question about what we value. In my career so far, I've asked myself many times, what kind of leader do I want to be? Often that's been when I've been confronted with disagreements and ultimately had to ask myself what I want to stand for. These values evolved over time. They were the essence of questions that I've asked myself, of situations I've faced, decisions I've made, and discussions I've been part of. In times of change, these values are especially crucial. And values will be one of the threads that we keep coming back to in this talk. It comes again later when we talk about organizations as well. I also believe that leading by example starts by managing ourselves. The best tool to drive the behaviors that we want to see in others is by demonstrating them ourselves. There's an expression that David Nadler and Michael Tushman used. They wrote about institutionalizing change, and they called this mundane behaviors. So behaviors that will inevitably be noticed by the people around us, but they may actually appear very simple, but can have a really huge impact. A couple pillars in that are, first of all, managing our instincts. Our brains are designed to not want change. This means that we always need to manage our instincts that refuse change. Then managing our energy. It can really help if you ask yourself, what drains or what energizes me and why? That's much better than just managing your time. Then spend your time deliberately, always prioritize ruthlessly, because the way that we spend our time also captures what we actually value. Also untangle your ego from your work. That means having your ego tied up in your work makes it really hard to think strategically, to get a critical distance, and to make the best decisions for your team and yourself. And then also manage your decisions. The decisions that we make get absorbed by the people around us. For example, who we hire, who we promote, who we give interesting projects or opportunities to. All of those things send messages about what we value. I understand that that's a lot, and that's quite a challenge also, and one challenge that I also go through every day. Because managing ourselves like this, it requires us to be constantly both present in the moment and at the same time also think about how we're showing up in this moment, critically observing our behaviors and responses and taking critical distance to ourselves. This means it's an exercise in abstraction. So let's recap the first part of this talk. We've talked about how to show up as a leader for ourselves. We looked at defining moments and how we shape our responses as leaders. Management being an inherently personal, management and leadership being inherently personal. Looking at how we use our strengths, our mindset, and our thought patterns to respond and lead. We also looked at self-reflection as an important tool and how it helps us reflect our position and perspective as leaders. Then we looked at a learning mindset and how continuously learning, evolving, reflecting as leaders really helps us grow. And then managing ourselves, like managing our energy, prioritizing, and managing our instincts. Of course, we also need to talk about how to show up as leaders for our teams, for our organizations, and for the other people around us. And I want to also share a couple of concepts with you that I found useful in dealing change. First of all, treating change as loss. That's a really big one, and one that I found really, really useful over the last years that I've been using it. Any change, even when it's clearly the right change to make, can trigger feelings of loss in people. For example, loss of control, loss of pride, or loss of status. For example, what you may see in your organization is that people who've been successful in your organization so far, or high performers, really strong, may suddenly be really uncertain because they don't know if they will succeed in the future or how to succeed in the future. Changes mean that we're breaking psychological contracts with employees. For example, you move from everyone in your team being able to basically deliver very independently to suddenly having a software delivery process that's being introduced. That means that the way that people operate is shifting. You're breaking a contract. Or you move from an environment without metrics to one where suddenly metrics are being utilized, like delivery metrics. You're looking at throughput or other items, which means that there's a very different way of how people understand their work is being reviewed. Or there's decisions about a change in programming language to use. Again, something that's been working before may be different in the future, and that can trigger feelings of loss. There's also loss of visibility and insight. Like I've mentioned, I've been working with fast-growing organizations for years. Engineers who used to report directly to the CTO for many years previously, they now report to an engineering manager who reports to a senior manager, to a VP, to the CTO. So there's suddenly many more layers of hierarchy in between. That also means that this engineer has very different insight, very different conversations. That also, again, has its upsides, but also means loss. So in all of these and many more cases, you can make changes much more successful if you're addressing these transitions that people go through during a change. Don't just push forward, but focus on supporting people through the transition to something new. There is a model that William Bridges defined, which I've outlined on this slide. It's called the Bridges Transition Model. And the idea is to help people focus on first discovering and then accepting and embracing the new situation. The 3 stages for this are, first of all, an ending. So helping people deal with losses by acknowledging, hey, it's a change. This is going to be something new for you. The second part is the neutral zone. So realigning towards the new, helping people understand, okay, this is what the new change is going to mean for you, helping them by answering questions that they may have. And then only the third part, actually starting the new. Don't just start at part 3, the new beginning, but actually go through all changes. This helps tremendously because it helps people embrace change. There's a great example, which I like for treating change as loss, from Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream brand. So Ben & Jerry's sometimes discontinue flavors for a variety of reasons. And they have on their website, you can actually find it. It's called their flavor graveyard. So they pay tribute to ice cream flavors that they actually don't make anymore and celebrate the times that those flavors have been around. A second foundational concept around change is resilience. And a lot of people have talked about resilience over the last year because it is such a monumental concept for us. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It's about toughness, but also about having the faculty to grow and thrive during unpredicted and unpredictable challenge and adversity. Resilience is about preparedness for the unknown unknowns. That's a really hard skill. But there are ways that we can create resilience in our teams as leaders. Resilience at the individual level is often dictated by a combination of genetics, personal history, environment, and situational context. But think of resilience as a set of skills as well that can be and often are learned. And part of building those skills comes from being exposed to very difficult but manageable experiences. So optimism is a really important part of that, but not optimism that just celebrates everything no matter what, but optimism that's realistic and also acknowledges that things have downsides and that there's nuances to situation. A moral compass also that helps us tell right from wrong. And then emotional and cognitive flexibility are really helpful there as well. So helping people, again, move through change in the way that we just talked about, understand all changes, treating change as loss, can help with that flexibility. And then social connectedness, so having strong connections as a team, going through changes together. A sense of purpose is really important as well. So in the work environment, that can be having a clear strategy, a business vision, a mission that a team is aligned around, or a larger meaning of the work that you're doing. So if it's social impact, for example. And a key trait of resilient people is always that they accept what they cannot change and focus their energy on what they can change. And we'll look at a couple more things that can help with this over the next couple slides. Many of the practices that I'm talking about today are directly connected with resilience, and you'll see those themes showing up here again. So showing up as a leader in times of change means treating change as loss through acknowledging an ending, addressing things that have been lost, and then starting something new. And then also understanding resilience, so being prepared for the unknown unknowns. But one thing that's important about change is that it's not just about reacting to it. And I think that's a really important distinction because we've looked at a lot of change that we're reacting to, like a global pandemic or changes that are going on in the world around us, in our organizations, that we're not necessarily initiating as leaders. But to get ahead of the competition, organizations need to flip the script on change and enable employees to lead change themselves. So it's not just about being prepared for change, but also leading change. And I want to talk about how you can do that in your team. Many organizations that have gone through agile transformation have increased their ability to change. Research suggests that agile transformation can have a really powerful impact on the bottom line, in addition to other widely recognized benefits. These are metrics from a McKinsey survey that looked at 22 organizations in 6 sectors last year. This survey showed that there's significant improvements for employee engagement, customer satisfaction, operational performance, and financial performance in organizations that move to greater agility. The foundation for leading change is basically combining stability and flexibility. So having systems in place that we can rely on as a foundation that allows us to be able to change. That's very abstract, but I'll make it more concrete. So the agile software delivery process, is usually a relatively unified and stable process. But the way that it's set up allows teams to adjust it to their needs and to move fast and respond to changes really quickly, for example, by getting user feedback quickly and increasing their business impact. This means keeping processes adaptable and nimble allows organizations to be quick in responding, adjusting, adapting. That means that agility is really a prerequisite for resilience. So you as a leader create an organization or a team where leaders can adapt and create teams where people are able to quickly collaborate, improvise, learn, and adjust their behaviors. This also means that, yes, we can always optimize in certain ways for preventing failure in our systems, no matter if it's technical systems or people systems. But resilience is about preparing for the unknown unknowns. This means that we need to put processes, structures, systems in place that help us recover quickly. So we can't prevent everything going wrong. Like you can't prevent every outage in your system. And actually, if you can, let me know how you do it, probably by never changing it. But you can't prevent every outage in your system. But what you can change is how quickly you're able to fix it, how you're able to recover again when an outage occurs. So this means that this flexibility helps create organizational resilience. A couple more ways that we can create that kind of flexibility that helps us change faster. So, for example, identifying bottlenecks, identifying single points of failure and constraints. For example, when we're hiring people, there's a lot of work that's being done by the hiring managers and the recruiters. There are often bottlenecks in this process. Can we distribute how decisions are being made there? Another way to do this, increase this flexibility, is through reducing complexity of processes and decision-making. So make it easy to do the right thing. And then also create an open culture where differing perspectives are valued. This will help you avoid biases and blind spots in your work. So I've talked about a lot of abstract concepts again. Let's look at where to actually start. If you want to lead change in your org, this is a really, really good way to do it. So I've talked earlier about resilience and mentioned that resilient people, they look at a difficult situation and they look for meaningful opportunities within it. They focus on what they can change within any situation. This is a model that's basically called controlled influence soup. It's adapted from a book by Stephen Covey and also described by Jim Bullock. There's a couple people who've basically used this. And I've used this many times with teams, in change situations especially. The idea is for teams that are facing change to use this as a framework to focus what they're directing their energy to. So say there's a big change coming up that impacts the team. What you can do with the team is then use this model to review what are the parts that we can directly control. So that's the center circle that you see here. All actions that are directly controllable by the team go there. Then there's a couple of other things that are coming up in this change where the team may be able to influence through trying to persuade people, through recommending actions. That's the second circle, the influence area. And then there's a lot of things, for example, well, the change itself, the team wish it hadn't happened, where the team probably can't actually do anything about it. That goes into the soup area. So the idea is that soup is everything that the team can't actually really do anything about. This can help people, guide them to a mental model where they understand what they can actually directly control, where their influence may be, and which parts they may just have to let go because they can't really do anything about it. So it's a useful framework for responding to change. You can use it for team discussions or retrospectives or other ways where you're discussing with your teams what's changing. Another way to lead change is to lead with the results that you're looking for. So whenever we're introducing changes now, I always ask my staff, basically, how will we know whether the change that we're initiating is working? We look at, here are the success metrics, here are the criteria that we're ultimately looking to hit, or the acceptance criteria, and then work backwards from that. So this matters a lot because it means that, first of all, we're designing this with data in mind. We're already trying to figure out how we're going to track whether the change is working. And it defines signals that we can actually impact. That requires a lot of work. Like, this is not always easy. And in some cases, it's also meant that we've completely shifted how we've thought about change, because if you can't measure it, it's probably going to be really difficult to assess impact. So this can be really hard, but it's also crucial, because approaching changes with the results that we're looking for in mind, this helps us increase our ability to adapt, especially when we optimize for learning fast. So I believe that it's really crucial to understand, with any change that you're initiating, how can I learn fast whether this is working or not. So optimizing our ability to respond to deviations from our expectations, instead of just optimizing for getting everything right up front. Sorry. One example that I like talking about here is our hiring. So we've been hiring a lot in my organization, and we've been making a couple changes to our hiring process along the way to support our hiring targets and the growth of our organization. In hiring, the important metric is, of course, how many people are we hiring by, for example, the end of the quarter or the end of the year. But that's usually really far out, like between 3 and 12 months. And there's a lot of things that can happen along the way. So we didn't just look at those metrics of like how many people have we hired, but we also look at different metrics that give us much shorter term signal. For example, what's our hiring speed? So the time to hire until we have someone, from going from an application until we actually have someone who signed a contract. Other metrics that are even shorter term than that are, for example, the time until we have a candidate in a certain stage. So going from application review to, for example, having a candidate speak with our recruiter or with the hiring manager. 1 second, please. Sorry about that. So not looking at the long-term time to hire, but also how many days does it take for a candidate to speak to a recruiter, to a hiring manager. So those much shorter term metrics over time will allow us to get a much better picture of what's working or not. We also look at pass-through rates, so how many people go from one stage in the interview process to the next one. Again, all of those to illustrate. Look at the short-term movement. Don't just look at the long-term goal that you're looking to accomplish. So say you want to initiate a change, you have the metrics in place, you know how you're going to learn really quickly if what you're doing is working or not. What next? I do believe that as leaders, one of our biggest tasks is to scale organizations effectively by having leadership at all levels. I mentioned earlier already that I believe leadership skills are distinct skills that are different from management, and leadership skills can be presented and demonstrated by everyone in any role. Our task as leaders is to build a team that can learn, adapt, and grow and stick together along the way. And we need to bring people up with and around us. Especially in distributed organizations, teams need leadership at all levels to carry our organizations forward and ultimately help us lead change. So fostering this leadership at all levels, there's a lot of things that you as a leader can actually do for them. First of all, you lead through context instead of instead of control. That's important. So you set direction, you share vision, you share a bigger picture and values. And then you have people own how they're going to accomplish that instead of micromanaging them. Set clear expectations, so share principles, outcomes that you're looking for, and then give people autonomy to achieve those. Focus on running experiments. Those are a really good way to learn quickly. So have people come up with hypotheses and then test them out through doing the work for 1 week, 2 weeks, and seeing what's working or not, running these quick assessments and then iterating from there. Also make it easy for people to make decisions. The more decisions go through you as a leader, the worse your team is going to be doing, because a lot of decisions are going to run through you directly. Instead, make it easy for people to understand what your expectations are and then have them own decisions themselves. Reduce the dependencies. We already talked earlier about organizational flexibility and how important it is to reduce single points of failure. If you as a leader always have to be around for things to be working, you're the single point of failure, and you need to look at that. And then also coach people towards leading change. Don't tell people what exactly to do, but help them drive change themselves. So prioritize developing leaders across your organization. Empower leaders in your teams. And that creates a multiplier effect across your teams. If you want to lead change, you also have to be mindful of your operational horizon. The human brain is really programmed to narrow its focus in the face of a threat. So that's an evolutionary survival mechanism designed for protecting us. The trap in that is that our field of vision becomes really restricted to the immediate foreground, and we can't really see anything in the longer term. This can be especially tricky if you worked your way up in your organization. So if you started as an engineer, for example, and then you move to a management role at some point, this can be really difficult, because if you're good at the tactical and operational level, managing a crisis can be really thrilling. Your adrenaline spikes, decisions are made, quick actions are taken. This feels like you're adding tangible value. There's instant gratification and reward. It's really hard to resist. The ways that I've seen this play out, for example, is in incident response. So in prior organizations that I've been part of, the person who founded the company, who was also an engineer themselves and at some point became a founder and manager, would still, after many years, still be involved in the incident response because they knew the system. They were really good at that. Even though the company now had a team of several hundred engineers, this person would still be there. That's a classic way for how this shows up, and this is not a judgment about whether this behavior is good or bad, but it can be a result of the operational horizon kicking in. So to manage that is basically to avoid the operational comfort zone trap. This operational comfort zone trap pulls us to resort to what we know. It's what we're used to and what we know we're good at. We get into the weeds because we can. But leading change requires that we take the longer term view and we focus on leading. So we create a vision, we convey that to our people, we set expectations, and then we have people actually manage the more tactical side of things. Distributing in an organization who manages which view, so basically having people focus on the short term, having other people focus on the longer term, can really help, because it also means you're slicing the context that people have to hold. Because handling a very broad context can also be really exhausting and really difficult to navigate that degree of ambiguity. Some practical ways to do all of this is, as a leader, always make time for strategic issues. Build a habit of thinking about strategy every single day, even if it's for just 5 to 10 minutes. I sit down every day when I start my work and just think about where we're at on strategy and the longer term. This always needs to be a priority for you and not negotiable. And it brings us back to values, because looking past the present and looking at the longer term requires us to think about values, principles, mission. These serve as guideposts and increase our overall elasticity and resilience in our system. If we focus on leading through values, principles, and missions, it means we don't have to use rigid norms. We don't have to micromanage people. This helps people narrow down the decisions that they can make, but it also helps them make the optimal choices in any situations. So we just looked at not just responding to, but creating change. So we reviewed how we can set up a mix of stability and flexibility in our systems by having processes that teams can still adapt within, like agile delivery process. We looked at optimizing for fast learning by having metrics that tell us really quickly what's working versus not. We also looked at leadership at all levels and how to use ambiguity and delegating objectives as a way to grow people and help them use their creativity and subject matter expertise to solve problems. Then we looked at the operational comfort zone trap, so making sure that we're maintaining connection with the bigger picture, with strategy, and also how values and mission and principles can help with that. So we looked at a lot of higher level guiding principles right now. And I want to talk quickly a little bit about how to lead change every day. So actions and interactions that you can do over the next days in your organizations to lead change. I believe that transforming organizations means ultimately changing individual behaviors and doing it at scale. There's resilience that we've talked about quite a lot. And a big part of resilience is creating culture. I like the definition of culture as the behaviors that we reward and punish, because that ultimately makes culture. And a big part of resilience there is that we reward learning. So we create processes and cultural norms that propagate experimenting quickly, adapting, and collaborating. A big part of that also needs to be embracing failure. Use failure as a learning opportunity. For example, by adapting blameless incident reviews, or make space for teams to actually learn from incidents through having retrospectives on a regular basis. When you as a leader make mistakes, be open about them, address what you're doing to fix them, and what you're putting in place to do better in the future. Because the way that we talk about failure as leaders can really have huge impact. It's also important for us as leaders to provide clarity. So making sure that people understand how changes are impacting them and how they are going to change their job because of changes that are happening. So adapting that kind of leadership style really helps with that. There's a great model for this again that I'm not going to cover in detail, but if you want to look it up, it's here. So this is by Efraid Goldratt-Ashlag from 1984 already, actually. And it's about the layers of resistance to change. So basically, turning this around, you would look at building alignment on what the problem is, what the solution is, what the implementation is, to ultimately get to buy-in. And this can really help you if you're trying to drive a change in your organization to get everyone on the same page ultimately. If you're starting with the implementation, you're always going to have to go one step back again. There's an alignment toolbox that I've been sharing for a while and that I've gotten feedback from. It's been really useful. And there's a couple communications tools within this toolbox that you can use in your work every day. First of all, create communication patterns. So make sure people understand where to expect which communication. For example, new hires or people leaving your team are always going to be announced in a weekly email that you send, or any strategy will always be communicated at a monthly department meeting. Whatever it is, like, create and use those patterns. The side effect is also that it's making it easier for you to remember which things you have to communicate and when. Second part is over-communicate. Always assume that people don't know and that they have to hear something many times. When you're tired of saying something, assume that 60 or 80% of people have heard it. Then always over-communicate vision and strategy. And fourth point is draw connections. Mentioned earlier already, make sure people understand how changes relate to them. What does this mean for my role? What does it mean for my work next week or next month? Help people draw those connections. It's really important. Always provide clear feedback paths. So make sure people know where they can share feedback if they have it. And be a dolphin. So sorry about that. Dolphins always pop up really frequently to get air, unlike whales, for example, that can stay underwater much longer. So rather communicate small changes very frequently and avoid trying to make a big splash, but stay connected with your team, stay present as a leader. And yeah, be a realistic cheerleader. So make sure to cheer your team on. Don't gloss over challenges, but be realistic, be an optimist. Say, it'll be a lift or it'll be difficult, but we can do it. And also don't forget to celebrate wins. We've talked about acknowledging loss and treating change as loss earlier, but also acknowledge positive change, don't forget that, and celebrate wins with your team early. So we looked at change every day through situational leadership, realistic cheerleading, the alignment toolbox, which is basically communicating a lot, and then celebrating wins with your team as well. So over the last 35-ish minutes, we looked at change and our relationship with it, about how to shape our role as leaders and show up as leaders by treating change as loss and building resilient teams and organizations. And we looked at how to get ahead by leading change. through building resilient organizations and leading change every day. And before I go, I want to leave you with one last notion on change. The musher, so it's a human driver of a dog sled team, Blair Braverman, she wrote last year in an article about what her sled dogs taught her about planning for the unknown. It's on the New York Times. And she wrote about how to prepare for an unseen ending by basically front-loading and prioritizing rest. She writes, "We can't just plan to take care of ourselves later, because if you don't know how far you're going, you need to act like you're going forever. Planning for forever is essentially impossible, which can actually be freeing. It brings you back into the present." Today, we looked at being a human and at being a leader. We looked at shaping our roles and building resilient organizations with leaders at all levels. And together with those teams, leading change every day. Any change for us as leaders, it presents a defining moment and an opportunity for us. All of us are leading through change every single day, and whether we want it or not. As a leader, you may not always know how far you're going, and you need to act like you're going forever. But planning for forever is essentially impossible. So in this defining moment, how are you going to show up as a leader? Thank you so much for your time and for having me. And I'm going to stop screen sharing now so we can get to a couple of questions. So there's one question in the chat. Thank you for sharing that. The question, I'll just read it out loud, is, can you say a little on the safety space, so psychological safety that has to be there for changes? How is it coexisting with leading change? And how does one make sure it's still there while we change? I think that's a really great question. Thank you for raising it. And if any of you have questions, feel free to put in the chat as well. So I do believe that psychological safety is a prerequisite for being able to to make change run really well on teams. The reason for that is that big component of psychological safety is that everyone's able to share their thoughts that are relevant to work and is able to share feedback, and that the team is in a position to collectively learn. This means that if you're designing change in a way where you're learning quickly, like we talked about earlier, you have metrics in place, you understand the outcomes you're looking for, you're putting already in place frameworks that are going to help with that. I also believe that the way that you're responding to change is another important factor. I mentioned, for example, making sure there are ways for people to give feedback, but it's also important for you how you talk about feedback. So making sure people can share, hey, here are my thoughts on this change, and at the same time that you're owning up to that. So you say, okay, I've gotten this and that feedback, I'm making these adjustments. So basically, the flexibility in your leadership is going to be really important. Basically, how you run the change, not just glossing over people's concerns, but addressing them, being empathetic, making adjustments to the changes that you're making based on feedback you're hearing. That also goes to the other point we covered earlier around resilience, where having teams understand the changes, the context, and then leading through them, the change mod, the treating changes, loss aspects with them can also help with that part. Sorry, that was a quite long answer. I'm not seeing any other questions. So I'm just going to check if I have covered everything that the person asked. Yes, so I do basically, ultimately, I would say as a bottom line, psychological safety and being able to handle and lead change well go hand in hand and aren't mutually exclusive, but rather go together. And I think that's it on questions. So thank you, everyone who's been here. It was really great to be here with you today. Oh, we're just getting one last question. What if values being transmitted are not shown when transforming organizations? Great question. I think organizations that aren't demonstrating their values need to reassess if the values are actually correct and if they're the ones that they want to be running. And we have to go now. Sorry. Thank you.